So I'm Margrethe Kearney. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I left Michigan to go to the University of Chicago to study economics and stayed in Chicago for a little bit, deciding if I wanted to be an economist or some other thing, and decided that I wanted to go to law school. Went to Harvard Law School, a little place out east that you may have heard of. And after that, clerked at the Alaska State Supreme Court for a year, and then went to Chicago and worked at a big firm for about 10 years, and decided at that point that I was sort of done with living in Chicago, and I was also done with working on kind of the business side of things. Wanted really to do more policy work and to try to figure out how to make change in environmental law as opposed to just kind of get people, or deal with people's problems in environmental law. So I came to work for the Environmental Law and Policy Center, which is a Midwest focused group. And we do advocacy in clean energy, clean water, clean air, protection of unique spaces. And we're all located in the Midwest. We live here, we play here, we work here, we understand the Midwest. And so that gives us, I think, a unique ability to advocate for change in a Midwestern way, if you will. And clean water is something that I care a whole lot about, and I also really like beer. So this is an excellent place for me to be. And I will point out, the Highlands, which is, I thought, also an appropriate beer for the night because it's in collaboration with Land Conservancy.
Awesome. And then, so I'm Kris Spaulding. My background started in nonprofit work I went to U of M in what was then the School of Natural Resources and Environment. Thought I would stick with nonprofit on an advocacy side, was very not a big fan of business or big business. So here we are. It's funny how life changes. But ended up working at Herman Miller for 12 years. Most recently there, I was in the design for environment area, focused on sustainability and the sustainability of the products. So learned a lot about how Herman Miller applied sustainability as a business model in a really meaningful and impactful way. And then when my husband and I decided to open Vivant, applied all of that knowledge that I gained there. Office furniture is very different than beer, but when you set up a company, there is a lot of ways you can take from what you've learned elsewhere. So that is how we started. Vivant's been open since 2010. We also currently have another location we call Broadleaf Brewery and Spirits. We may talk about that a little bit. That one opened in 2019. So the first one opened during a recession, and the second one opened right before a pandemic. So we're really good at timing, but that's okay. Most importantly, our business is founded on the values of sustainability as a huge part of what we do. And then, the kinds of beers we do are more European style. And then our food is a lot more like a traditional restaurant experience. So we're really into food and beer, and then being a good neighbor. So we'll talk more about all those things. And then just to tie Margrethe and I together, we first met when we're still on the City of Grand Rapids Energy Advisory Board. And I got to know her through that and realized she was definitely someone I needed to know better because of all the great work that she does. And plus she's really awesome. So that's how we know each other. And now we just drink beers together in addition to that. Okay, and then the whole thing, what we're going to do here is more of kind of a back and forth interview, and then we'll save some time for questions at the end.
Perfect. And because I'm the lawyer, I'm used to asking people questions all the time. So I'm going to ask Kris a lot of questions. And one is about this LEED Silver certification that we see on the door. So a little bit about what that means and why it matters, and then what beyond this has Brewery Vivant sort of done?
Yeah, so one of our claims to fame is that we're the first LEED certified commercial microbrewery anywhere in the galaxy, according to Mayor Hartwell. And that is awesome. When we opened Vivant, we wanted to make sure that people understood that we were serious about sustainability and not just someone that was going to talk about it and not do anything. So it was really important for our project to seek the certification. Also very relevant within Grand Rapids, we have a lot of LEED certified buildings in the neighborhood that we're in, East Hills. There's a number of neighbor buildings that had LEED certification. So it was something we knew mattered to people, and it definitely mattered to us, and it's kind of a badge of honor, which was great. Is, you know, shows that the building we renovated, it's a former funeral home chapel. So we have a historic building that our LEED certification is actually a new construction version because we had to redo everything within the building outside of the shell itself, but gave us a lot of opportunity to be more energy and water efficient, use the right resources and all of that. So that's something that I think is pretty cool. And here's a photo of the inside of our space if you haven't been there. So this is was the chapel itself, and then our brewery is in a space that was originally a car dealership in the 1920s, but became part of the funeral home at one point. And you can see here, you know, community is really important to us. We have these really long tables. That was something that when we first had that in our business plan, the investors we were talking to were like, there's no way people are going to want to sit next to each other, you know, that don't know each other. And it's awesome to see how wrong they were. Obviously, the pandemic has kind of changed some of that a little bit, but up until that point, we see a lot more of these community style tables around, you know, around town and around the state. And I think it's great because I think one of the best things a brewery can do, you know, it's a pub, it's a public house, right? It's a place for people to get together and talk about things that matter and meet new friends. We have a lot of cool stories about our guests that become friends or become married couples or whatever it may be.
That's really cool. I think I've been there before and I've spent time at those tables, but never really thought about the fact that it was kind of an intentional decision to bring people together. That's really neat to know.
Yeah. Yeah. And then quick thing about B Corp. So we're also a certified B Corp. If you're not familiar with that, that's like LEED certification is for a building. B Corp is for your entire company. So just a way again to prove that we're not just talking the talk, that we're actually walking the walk. We've been certified since 2014, and that looks at what our impact is on not just our investors and our profitability, but also what's our impact on our employees, our suppliers, our community, and the earth. And then also, you know, what's the product that we make. So it's a pretty tough certification to get. And we're really proud that we've had it. And every time we recertify, we are close to maintaining the same number of points. I think we've gone up a little bit each time, but a cool certification to look for. If you look on my can here, you can see we put a little B logo. Look for that for other products because I think there's over 4,000 companies now that are B Corps, which is great. It's a growing number.
Yeah, look for the B. All right, look for the B on your beer. I like it. Oh, and I love this because I work a lot in clean energy at the Public Service Commission, and solar panels are kind of all the rage, and so I always brag about Brewery Vivant when people talk about them.
Yeah, that's our roof, which was a little bit of a challenge as a historic building. We had to not optimize how those panels function on the peak roof on the chapel, but it accounts for about 10% of our electric use every year as far as this campus goes for Vivant. But 192 panels that was installed in 2016. So it's the equivalent of planting thousands of trees. But it's awesome. It's a great statement. I like that they're so visible. You know, our staff come in, and especially when people are new, right? They drive up to the back of the building like, it's the coolest thing, driving into work and seeing, you know, what looks like aliens have landed on the roof of the barrel roof building. but really, you know, it's inspiring and awesome, and we get a lot of questions about it. So, okay.
Yeah, that's great. You were an early mover. Uh-oh. What's
Uh-oh.
that
Now we're
picture
gonna
of?
get a little bit into what kind of work have you been doing around water. We'll start focusing more on water now. But
Okay.
I'd love Margrethe to share some of the work that ELPC has been doing.
Yeah, so one of the things when Kris and I were talking about water and how important water, I mean, Kris, I guess one of the things that you haven't done yet, though, that maybe you should do before we do this, is you haven't talked about how important, like, where do you get your water and how is water important in brewing?
Yeah, our water is, you know, good city of Grand Rapids water. Comes right out of Lake Michigan through the Michigan filtration plant, which also is getting a whole bunch of solar panels, probably as we speak.
Yes.
But you know, we're so lucky to be in a state where we have access to really amazing, fresh, clean water. We don't treat it at all as far as cleaning the water up. It comes to us, we look at all the, you know, analysis on it and feel good about the quality of it. We definitely treat it based on the beer we're making, but that's more of a taste preference than anything else to make the beer have water more representative of the community that the style of beer originated in. So that's pretty cool. But so yeah, our water comes right from Lake Michigan, and you know, so grateful. One thing my husband and I always disagree on is I think our water is way too inexpensive. Um, if I look at what other breweries around the country have to spend for their water, like you know, in the Midwest, I think we have the ability to take it for granted that we have this access, and we're used to how that benefits us, right? But others are paying, you know, multiples of what we're paying. So he doesn't like me to mention that because, you know, we don't want price increases, but it's the truth.
Nobody tell the city what
Yeah.
Kris just said. But it's true, right? We do take our water for granted, I think, in Michigan because we just have so much of it. And sometimes we think it's always going to stay just as good as it is now. One of the cases that ELPC has worked on is in it's the case is actually in Ohio, but it's a Lake Erie case, where we filed a lawsuit because Michigan found Lake Erie to be an impaired water. And a lot of the reason that Lake Erie is impaired is because there are tons and tons of concentrated animal feeding operations that are in the area. And the animals poop a lot, and that poop is used in local fields. And so much of it, there's more of it than could possibly ever actually be used for agricultural purposes. It obviously has nutrient value, but only up to a certain point. And then the rest of the nutrients just wash off into the waterways when it rains. And those nutrients, when they go into the water, they allow things like algae, harmful algae blooms you may have heard of, to grow. And Toledo, right, had its water shut down for several days because there was a toxic algae bloom in the area where the water intake was. You had not experienced that, Kris, because you get your water from Lake Michigan. And so far, we haven't seen that problem in Lake Michigan. But with increasing water temperatures as a result of climate change, and with an increasing number of CAFOs that we're seeing in Michigan, it's really starting to become a serious concern that we're going to see some of those same issues in Lake Michigan. So one of the things that my organization advocates for are meaningful permit requirements for operators of CAFOs. And this means things like you can't spread manure when the ground's frozen, right? Which seems like it should be a self-evident thing, but is something that has often been done in Michigan. And that's really sad because it just rolls right off the frozen ground into the water. And so that's one of the things we're doing to try to protect water so that we can have good beer.
Good clean beer. So the reason this slide is here, you can guess which one is the CAFO, and then the other one is the lifestyle, that the cattle that we use for all of our beef at Vivant comes from this beautiful farm. You know, where we source all of our ingredients is really important to us. We have a goal to hit at least 50% of our food from the state of Michigan, and we're there. And then for our beer, our goal is 25%. We're definitely not there. We have a lot more grain that needs to be grown and malted here in order to reach that. But I think that's being worked on. So I'm hopeful that we'll have a supplier opportunity there. But anyway, the farm that you can see there is Wernette Farm, which is up in Remus. It's a great family-run farm. They occupy a lot of space because they rotate their cattle, you know, from one field to another over time. They're actually a part of this awesome agricultural study that Michigan State's a part of, along with various others throughout the world. And they're looking at when you allow cattle to live in more of an environment that, you know, they would choose, they would naturally be in. They're actually regenerating the soil and sequestering carbon. And they're able to prove that through this long-term study. I think they're in maybe the 8th year. I probably have that wrong, but it's been going on for a while, and they're getting really great data that they can use to prove out in a life cycle assessment what the benefits are to what I call happy beef, as opposed to, you know, the other photo there. So just, you know, another example of the things that we're looking at and how we need people like the ELPC team to be advocating for better treatment of all things, the earth and the animals. And then we included this too. I don't know, Margrethe, if you want to give a little bit more. I think you already referenced what's happening in that top picture.
Yeah, exactly. The top picture is sadly the poop. And it's a lot of it, right? It's tanker trucks, so it's a lot. But one of the reasons I wanted to put that CAFO farm from Waldron, Michigan, this is taken by a colleague of mine, is to show that, you know, you contrast that with the picture that you showed of the farm that you use. Like, that looks to me like that's a farm. This is like a factory, right? This is really looks like a manufacturing facility, and that really is what it is, with thousands of heads of cattle inside, and you can see the lagoons for the waste, and those pose a risk if they overflow or if they're breached. So this really is not like what we think of in Michigan. I mean, my grandparents were farmers. We have a long agricultural tradition. I think it's really important. But when we talk about CAFOs, I just want everyone in their head to be clear that, you know, the picture that should pop up is not what Kris showed you. It's this dairy CAFO here that really is like a manufacturing plant.
Oh, fun stuff. Oh, let's get to a pretty picture.
I know, I like this picture. This is a good one.
This is just my way of showing you all our other location, which is the one called Broadleaf. Not a LEED certified building. We did not choose to go that route for this, but we did incorporate as many reusable, recycled materials as we could. So those are shipping containers that are pretty awesome. Our kitchen's inside that bottom one, and then we have the other one for space. And then you can see like the back wall there. Those are pallet boards from pallets that were no longer useful. So we did our best to use a lot of materials that we thought were more responsible. The bar, which you can barely see the top of that, but that is this really sweet live edge that was a, oh my gosh, the emerald ash borer. It was an ash, like a big piece of ash wood, and you can see all the squigglies from the emerald ash borer and understand what's happening when we talk about that as an invasive pest for our trees. So it's a beautiful bar, but it's also an educational one that I think is just cool. So I wanted to show you. And it is kind of hard to look at. It's a couple other views of the space, but the people we worked with on those shipping containers, they were so awesome. They had to cut part of it out just to fit in the space, and then they painted those and brought them, and we made them into booths. So I love the mindset that our partners, you know, pick up when we're working with them. Okay, switching gears a little bit here. Here's another point of connection between Margrethe and I is the Great Lakes Business Network. So this is a group of businesses, a growing number, that really joined forces to advocate for, started out as Line 5, and shutting down Line 5, but also the advocacy is kind of growing as different issues come up in the state. So the harmful algal blooms is another one that we're not as active in, just because of our proximity, but other things as well. So that map just shows where the different members are. But it's a great organization. Something I love that business has a voice, as long as we are using it properly, right? Like it's easy for businesses, especially ones that are considered to be cool, which craft breweries are. It is easier for us to get press for things. So I love opportunities to advocate for our values and things that we believe in. And this is a great way to do it. A lot of good people who are smart and very intentional, and really, trying to amplify the voices of all businesses involved. So what's cool about that is Margrethe has been involved in some of that Line 5 work. So how about you tell us some about that?
Yeah, so Line 5, for those who haven't heard of it, is an oil pipeline that runs through the Straits of Mackinac, right by the iconic Mackinac Bridge. And on Chris's last slide, you saw a cluster, a lot of businesses there, right up by that Straits area. If that line were to rupture, that whole area is going to see oil in the water and on the coast. And it's a 5-year-old line. It's well beyond its useful life. It's been hit by anchors. It's had anchor supports that have come out. It's a disaster waiting to happen. And our governor has actually ordered it to be shut down, which Enbridge, who operates the line, is fighting tooth and nail about. Enbridge also wants to put that line into a tunnel, which it claims, well, that'll take away the risk of a spill to the Great Lakes. The problem is what Enbridge isn't thinking about is investing in more fossil fuel infrastructure, when we just saw the IPCC's 6th report telling us that's exactly what we should not be doing. Not a good choice, right? But the Great Lakes Business Network, what's been really awesome about working with that group is a lot of what we hear when we talk about risks to the environment is, well, if we shut down this pipeline or if we stop this activity that causes this risk, then we're going to lose jobs and we're going to have economic harm. And I think that what the Great Lakes Business Network has done is come up and say, wait a second, if this risk actually happens, if it comes to fruition, we're going to be hurt. We're going to have to lay people off. We're going to shut down our businesses. It's going to impact the breweries. It's going to impact the tourism businesses, kayaking, rentals. Like a lot of what Michigan's economy is built on now relies on having clean water and clean natural resources. And so it's been good to see that group step up and tell the story on the other side about how we need to be protecting our water.
Agreed.
So, thank you, Kris, for doing that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing the hard part, right? I can sign my name to something and sign my company up, but it's the work that everyone does behind the scenes that actually move the needle. So good partnerships.
It takes a village.
It does. It takes a village. All right. And then this is just another campaign that we participate in through the NRDC. So this has been around for quite a few years now, but the Brewers for Clean Water, that really started when the Clean Water Act was being relooked at a number of years ago, and it continues on as that legislation has kind of gone back and forth in different administrations and evolved over time. But just another way that we're able to advocate for things that we believe in as a company through amazing partnerships with others who have the resources and the knowledge to really drive the right message home and organize us as different businesses. So I think we might be nearing the end of the plan slides, but
Yeah, well, I have to point out on this slide the thing that my dad always said when he always had a beer. My dad doesn't like to drink water very much. He drinks coffee and he drinks milk and he has a beer every day at lunch. And when you ask him about drinking water, he'll say like, well, the water's not safe to drink or it's safer to drink. So tell me a little bit about this, like how he, in some ways, historically at one point was right.
yeah. So this is our flagship beer, Farmhand, which was the first beer we came out with. It's the only of our original mainstays that's still around. But the story behind it, right, is if you think about Europe quite a long time ago, the water wasn't necessarily safe to drink. So what the farmers would do is brew a really low alcohol beer, and they didn't know why that was safe to drink. They just knew that it was. And all the farm hands then had access to their allotment of this beer to be their beverage. We definitely brew a stronger than what they were doing. I would guess that was probably like a 2 or 3% beer, where I think Farmhand's like 5 or maybe 5.5. I can't quite remember, but I love the idea of, you know, not knowing what made beer better, and embracing it as part of your pay for your employees. They didn't realize it was the boiling, of course, of the water that in the brewing process that, you know, boiled off what the toxins were for their bodies. But we love that. So we thankfully no one had named a beer Farmhand. Let me tell you, when we opened, it was 2010. There was about 2,000 breweries in the U.S. Now there's almost 9,000. So in 10-ish years, we've more than quadrupled. So naming beers is becoming really challenging because everybody has used every cool name you could think of. So we got lucky with this one. We named it early. Oh yeah, forgot I put the bikes in there. You know, that's another thing that's important to us is our location at Vivant. You know, part of why we picked it is in a very walkable, bikeable, very neighborhood, mixed use area. But we advocate for bikes quite a bit. That seems to be important to a lot of our staff and to us as well. But we have installed the first public fix-it stand in the city a number of years ago. And we have a bunch of other bike-friendly things that we're also a bicycle certified business, which I think we'll be recertifying for that sometime soon, which is something I enjoy about a lot of these certifications. LEED is one that once you have it, and there's not really a follow-up. But both the B Corp and the bicycle friendly, you have to recertify every so many years, depending on which one, to show that you're still doing good things. So I like that quite a bit. I'm definitely a nerdy report card kid. So that's part of why we like certifications so much, right? Is they are kind of like a way to prove, right? Like I said, that we're doing what we say we're doing, but also to me, they keep us moving forward and always, you know, looking to achieve greater things. So yeah, that's that
Well,
one.
we're glad you're looking for the gold star all the time and trying to
I do love
overachieve,
me some
Kris.
gold stars.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with that. It's fine.
No, it's good.
Yeah. All right. I think this is maybe the last one.
There's one with a growler in it.
Oh, is there?
I think there's one that you can maybe see from the corner with the taps.
Okay. Oh, I know what you're talking about. So this one, this is grain, spent grain. Another thing that I think is important when we're talking about keeping our water clean is what happens with our waste. So this is an actual photo of ours. We don't dump it. We give it to a show cattle farmer. So this guy raises cattle that he puts in shows. They have these cool, like long curly horns. So he supplements their diet with our spent grain. There's formulas as far as how much grain different animals can eat that's safe for them. So that's a great partnership too, where he provides these blue totes and a big vessel to put them in outside, and then the farm comes and picks them up every few days. Doesn't cost us anything, doesn't cost him anything. It's a cool partnership. But that is something that's really important to us too, is where our waste goes. So we are one of the, sadly, I don't think there's enough restaurants that are composting. It's a pretty pricey thing, but I'm hopeful that there's this Kent County Sustainability Park that's being talked about a lot in the media right now, where they're trying to close loops, and really their goal was to not have to add to our landfill or add another landfill. And I think organic waste is one of the biggest things they're looking at as an opportunity. So I'll be really curious what the next bunch of years looks like. The partners are talking to, I think they have a way of sorting through people's trash mechanically to pull the organic waste out and compost it, which then you can obviously use for agricultural purposes. And it has a lot of value in that way. And oh my gosh, think of how much weight and volume food waste is within our waste system. So we keep ours out right now. It goes to a place to be composted, right? And hopefully turned back into soil. And then recycling as much as we can. But I think all of those things also keep our waters cleaner through not having to worry about containing something that could be valuable, right? Okay, and then this is the last one. This is just our handles.
Oh,
There
there's
may
no
be a
growler
growler in there.
It just makes me think of a growler when I see the tab,
Yes.
maybe.
Yeah, and if you think about what's the best choice as far as taking your beer from one spot to another, it is definitely a growler because you can reuse it a million times. I think during the pandemic, a lot of us weren't filling growlers just when no one knew what was safe and what wasn't safe. But I think most breweries have gone back to filling growlers. Usually if there's a price break for you if you go that route, and you save resources, right? Because we don't have to continually, keep using cans and recycling them. So
yeah, it makes me feel kind of cool too.
Yeah,
I don't know why.
It's
just
like
it's cool, right?
It's like your own gold star.
Yeah.
Walking out with a growler. So Margrethe, is there any other of your work that you think we should talk about related to water, or does that feel pretty good and we move into questions?
That feels pretty good for the Michigan stuff right now. I feel like if we got into questions, maybe some of it would be, I'd remember more things. I always do that where I go, oh yeah, we did do that other thing.
Heard that.
That other thing. There was that.
I know that state of mind well. All right, so I am going to stop sharing then. Let's see, I did that right. And we'll see if we have some questions. Oh, I don't see any questions. I would love some questions.
So I do have one question that came to me.
Yes.
One thing that somebody asked about was reducing water usage. So it seems like we would know that that at least a gallon of water might turn into a gallon of beer. But is there other water waste that's kind of going on? And then what do you all do to prevent that? And then historically, what have people done kind of, you mentioned earlier about brewing was a way of boiling off some toxins and maybe the alcohol kills some things a little bit if it's low level in there. What are some ways that water has been handled traditionally for brewing too?
Yeah, so the stats, I can actually, well, I won't share again because, well, nah, maybe I could do it quickly.
Got 'em.
There's some interesting stats as far as how much, let's see. Here it is. This shows you how much water a brewery typically uses to get to 1 unit of beer, as opposed to a distillery and a winery. So if you see this, these are somewhat old, but I think they're pretty relevant still statistics. If you are a giant brewery, like an Anheuser-Busch kind of a size, it takes 3 gallons of water to get to 1 gallon of beer. As opposed to, a distillery, you're looking at about 10 times that, and a winery a little bit more. But the biggest waste of water in the brewing process, as far as I see it in our size, and our size is pretty small. We're about like a 4,000 or 5,000 barrels as opposed to, you know, millions and millions of barrels as some of those sizes are, those businesses. We're more likely to use 7 to 10 gallons of water to get to 1 gallon of beer. And it is mostly in cleaning and sanitizing. So you have to, you know, always be cleaning your tanks and making sure that you get everything out of there so you don't have one previous beer infect the next one, or have any bugs in there that you don't want. So we as an industry do use a lot of water. There are ways to recycle some of that. So one of the technologies that I think every brewery should have, and it shocks me when they don't, is as part of the brewing process, you have to cool down your wort before you send it to the fermenter. As if you send this hot boiling wort over to the fermenter, you're going to kill the yeast and you're not going to get beer. So that cooling process, a great way to do that is you take your cold water, you know, that you're pumping in through the city, put it through a bunch of pipes. It's a heat exchanger process basically where it slowly cools that wort down, and then you take the water that's now warmed up from that cooling process and you put it into your hot liquor tank, which will be the next brew that you do comes out of that hot liquor tank, that water. So you're totally reducing your water usage by cooling it down and then putting that that now warmed up water into your hot liquor tank. So you're also using less energy because you don't have to heat it as much since it's already coming in partly warm. So that's a cool way to reduce some of your water usage, right? Instead of just having a pump that always is bringing in fresh water from the city into both of those things or whatever your water source is. There's really cool technology that is not functional for breweries our size where you can recapture your steam, right? Brewing's a pretty hot process, so there's a lot of steam involved. If you're running 24/7, there's great ways to capture that and then use that steam in another process. When you're small like us, though, you don't have the efficiency of a 24/7 cycle to be doing things like that. So a lot of it, in my opinion, is training and making sure your staff are aware of, you know, turning the pumps off and turning the hoses off and not using any more water than you need. What's great in our pub is, you know, we have some brewers that are pretty passionate about our values and they choose to work at our place because of that. So, you know, we name one the sustainability lead, and now that person's job is to make sure that everybody else is being smart about their usage. You know, maybe not everyone is as passionate about saving water as some people are. So that person can keep everyone else on kind of on their toes and make sure that they're making good choices. And also, you know, there's innovation that's happening constantly, especially as our industry has exploded in size. So another thing that person can do is look for those innovations as they start being sized for smaller breweries like ours. So a lot of opportunity to come, though. I always encourage, if I talk to higher ed students, like, hey, if you're into innovation and an entrepreneurial mind, like, this is a great industry to be a part of because there's so much opportunity and so many companies that want to do good things. We just don't always have the ability to be as efficient as we'd like to.
Well, if anybody has any other questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We have a very basic question. How many ounces are in a growler?
Oh, it's 64, I believe, so half a gallon.
Okay. So do feel free to ask questions. We've got all sorts of time to answer them. I have one, and you were mentioning, I guess this would probably be for Margrethe, a Line 5 issue. So Line 5's been around for a while. We saw what happened with Kalamazoo with the Kalamazoo River when another Enbridge pipeline failed or ruptured. Have there been assessments of how far south oil pollution would be affecting the lakes? And then that would go to, would the intake for the city of Grand Rapids be harmed in a way? And is the city of Grand Rapids kind of thinking about mitigation for what to do if there is an emergency like that?
I'm trying to picture in my head there have been such analyses done. So David Schwab, who is a professor at the University of Michigan, did an analysis a couple of years ago where he looked at what some different scenarios would be if there were a rupture of that line. And it's a really complicated and really bad place to have an oil spill because the pipeline's at the bottom of the straits, and there are tons of really unpredictable and very strong currents that change all the time. And so it could move that oil very quickly in lots of different directions. And so he's done an analysis of that, and it comes pretty far south. I don't think it comes as far south as the Grand Rapids water intake, but in sort of the worst case scenario, which would be, like in Kalamazoo, they didn't, oh, look at this. I like it. We're pulling it up. Good job, Kris. In Kalamazoo, they didn't notice, Enbridge didn't notice that there was a spill. It wasn't until someone called it in and was like, there's oil in the water. And even after that happened, it took them some time to confirm that and shut the line down. And so the worst case scenario really should involve a leak that goes on for some time. So that's what he sort of looked at, a couple different scenarios, and some of them, so that one on the top there, you can see a lot of it tends to go more into Huron than into Michigan. But look how far down it comes in Lake Huron. And of course, it's a prediction, right? Like, you don't know what's going to happen. I think what everybody's real fear is what if that happens in the middle of a cold winter when the straits is covered in ice and there's really nothing you can do to get out there. The Coast Guard can't get an icebreaker there. Without an icebreaker, you can't get any of the traditional ships that would be able to try to contain or mitigate the oil spill. I mean, that's the case even in high wave scenarios. The Coast Guard won't send ships out. No one will send ships out. There's never been a major oil spill in a freshwater setting before, a cold freshwater setting. So there's a lot of uncertainty about how you would be able to respond to it, and whether the methods that we've seen used in saltwater situations would also work here. So it's a very scary thing. It's one of the things that keeps me up at night.
Ooh, I was going to ask you that at the beginning. What are the things that keep you up at night?
That climate change, which has a huge impact on water, right? Like, that's gonna be one of the biggest threats to our waterways in Michigan is climate change.
For sure. I think about that quite a bit. You look at, we all need to be doing something, right? Or more than what we're doing. And no one wants to be regulated more or taxed more or any of those things as a business. But we have to get over some of that, because if we don't do the right thing, right, things are just going to keep getting worse. So I think there's a different state of mind that we all should be adopting, of recognizing the severity of the problem and knowing that we'll figure it out. You just have to believe that, believe it enough to do something, I guess.
And I used to tell, like, when I represented private corporations, one of the things that I kept trying to remind them is that the opposite of bad regulation is not no regulation. It's good regulation. And, there are some benefits to having like clear rules in place that everybody has to follow, because it means that nobody is, punished or penalized or put at a disadvantage because they're doing the right thing. I think that, like, Kris, you guys have a customer base that embraces your beer and your food and all of that for what it is, for just the quality of the product. But I think you also have a lot of people who are committed to the same causes and have the same values. And I think that makes the difference. But I don't think that that should be the only thing that we count on to get us there. So
So one of our attendees is a native of Scotland, and she has asked, one practice that's being implemented there is using wetlands as opposed to other freshwater sources for the brewing industry. And is that something that we can do in Michigan? Because it turns out that using the the wetlands as sources reduces the waste compared to using a river or a lake, like we often do here in Michigan with our Great Lakes Basin. Is that something that you all are looking at? And to add on to that, are there other technologies in other countries that you're excited about coming to the US? Or maybe old traditional technologies that we haven't even thought of, but 400 years ago it worked, and now actually we notice it's really sustainable.
I wish I had an answer to that. I love that idea. I haven't heard of that, so that's something that would be interesting to look at. But at this point, we're speaking of regulation, right? Like when we first opened, part of our building that we wanted to do was incorporate gray water and be able to use gray water to flush our toilets and things like that at the brewery, and we weren't able to because the city prevented that as an option. So I think the US is great at creating regulations with good intent, but that have unintended consequences. They're trying to protect us from ourselves, I think, generally, and from people making bad choices. But a lot of times those get in the way, and maybe an education campaign is more helpful than increased regulation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on all that, Margrethe.
Yeah, I mean, no, I think that it is a balance for sure. And I think that one of the issues with kind of voluntary compliance that has been problematic is that there are certain settings in which we've just seen that it doesn't work. So like the CAFOs are a really good example. There have been voluntary compliance programs. MEEP is one in Michigan, and there's one in Ohio that's not very well developed, but they're developing a new one to try to solve the problem. And if you just sort of look at the data over time, it's like they haven't had any meaningful impact on water quality. And so, yes, would it be better if everybody just adopted best practices and wanted to do all the right things to make sure they weren't, polluting the waterways? That'd be great. But the data doesn't really bear out that works all that well in every setting.
In many settings, I'm sure.
Yeah.